A quiet mountain town. A stranger arrives with a secret, and one morning changes everything. Something big is about to happen in Red Creek, and nothing will ever be the same. Stay till the end, and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The story is just beginning. The small mountain town of Red Creek still slept beneath a thin veil of morning fog when the first pale light of dawn touched the rooftops. The air was crisp and dry, filled with the scent of pine and cold asphalt. A few cars passed lazily down Main Street, their tires whispering against the road. The place felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the day to begin. At the edge of town, an old man in a plaid jacket swept the front steps of his diner, nodding politely to the milk truck that rumbled past. Nothing about this morning seemed unusual until a black SUV appeared from the bend in the road and slowed beside the small gas station near the highway. The vehicle stopped smoothly, its engine humming for a moment, before shutting off. From the driver's seat stepped a tall man in worn jeans, heavy boots, and a brown leather jacket that looked like it had seen too many winters. His hair, streaked with gray, was tied loosely at the back, and a pair of dark aviator sunglasses hid his eyes. He moved with the calm precision of someone who was used to watching, not rushing. His name was Seagal, though no one in Red Creek knew it yet. He was not there as a traveler, though he played the part well. He was the town's newly appointed chief of police, a decision made quietly by the council after too many complaints about the current department's conduct. He had chosen to arrive before the official announcement, to see for himself what kind of town he would be responsible for. Stephen entered the gas station, the bell above the door giving a small metallic chime. The cashier, a young man barely out of high school, barely looked up from his phone as Stephen walked to the counter. "Coffee?" the man asked without enthusiasm. Stephen nodded. A moment later, he stepped back outside, holding a steaming paper cup. The cold air met the heat of the drink, sending a faint swirl of vapor upward. Stephen leaned casually against a nearby patrol car parked by the pumps. He sipped slowly, eyes tracing the distant line of pine-covered hills. For a few quiet minutes, it was just him and the sound of the wind brushing through the leaves. He studied the streets with the instinct of someone who had spent years reading danger in small details. The town looked peaceful, but Stephen knew appearances meant little. His mind went to the reports he'd read before coming. Excessive force, intimidation, misconduct, all from officers sworn to protect. Red Creek needed more than a new chief. It needed a change of soul. But for now, he was content to stay silent and observe. The moment of calm didn't last long. The gas station door opened again with a squeak, and two men in uniform stepped out. They wore the same Red Creek police insignia that Stephen would soon command. Both were young, their postures loose but arrogant. The taller one, Officer Grant, had a square jaw and the kind of grin that often followed trouble. His partner, Officer Davis, was leaner, with restless eyes that darted between people as if always looking for a fight. They laughed at something private between them, but when Grant noticed Stephen leaning on the car, the amusement vanished. "Hey," he called out sharply, "you think you can just lean on a patrol car like that?" Stephen turned his head slowly toward him. Behind the sunglasses, his gaze was unreadable. "Just having a coffee," he said evenly. Grant frowned. "That's not the point. Get off the car." The voice was not a request. Stephen took another sip, then pushed himself away from the vehicle without argument. He stood quietly, letting the coffee rest in his hand. Davis smirked, crossing his arms. "Look at this guy," he said. "Thinks he's some kind of tough drifter." Stephen said nothing. He merely took a step back, keeping his posture relaxed. The silence between them was heavy, almost deliberate. Grant moved closer, clearly irritated that his authority hadn't caused fear. The man's boots crunched against the gravel as he stopped just a few feet away. "You deaf?" he demanded. "No," Stephen answered. His tone was quiet but certain. "Just not looking for trouble." The simplicity of the words seemed to provoke Grant further. He swatted at Stephen's cup, knocking it to the ground. The coffee splashed across the pavement, a dark stain spreading slowly toward the curb. The few people pumping gas turned their heads, sensing tension in the air. Stephen's eyes followed the spilled drink. He didn't move. The only sound was the faint clatter of the empty cup rolling near his boot. He looked back up at Grant, calm as stone. The stillness in his face wasn't submission. It was control, the kind that made tempers flare in insecure men. Grant stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold morning air. "You got an attitude problem, old man?" Stephen's answer came low and firm. "You've made your point, officer. Step back." The steadiness of his voice made Davis chuckle, but not comfortably. Hear that? He talks like he's someone important. A few customers nearby exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a middle-aged woman filling her tank, pulled her young son closer to the car. Another man, a truck driver, paused mid-fill to watch, phone half raised. Stephen shifted slightly, not out of fear, but readiness. His calmness was beginning to unnerve even Davis, though Grant mistook it for defiance. "Show me your ID," Grant barked. Stephen nodded once and reached slowly into his jacket pocket. The motion was so measured that Davis's hand twitched toward his holster. Stephen noticed, but kept moving calmly, pulling out a worn wallet and opening it to show the contents. "Here." Grant snatched it away and flipped through it without care. His eyes narrowed. "Nothing special here," he muttered, tossing it back. Stephen caught it easily. "Officer," Stephen said, tucking it away again, "the way you're speaking to me isn't right." Grant's jaw tightened. Respect has to be earned. "And yet," Stephen replied quietly, "you demand it, without giving any." The words landed softly but cut deep. Davis gave a nervous laugh, looking around at the small crowd that had begun to form. The tension was no longer private. People were watching, recording. The sound of murmurs rippled across the lot. Grant's face reddened. He took a half-step closer, finger jabbing the air. "Move along, before I give you a reason to regret hanging around here." Stephen didn't move. The faint breeze tugged at his jacket, but he remained steady. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice almost a whisper. Grant grinned sharply. "You threatening me?" "No," Stephen said, eyes hidden behind the dark lenses. "Just telling you the truth." The stillness stretched, thick enough to cut. Even the old man at the diner across the street had stopped sweeping, leaning on his broom as he watched. The rising sun cast long shadows over the asphalt, and for a moment, the entire gas station felt caught between breaths, between peace and chaos. Grant took one more step forward, so close now that his badge nearly brushed Stephen's chest. "Last warning," he hissed. "Get off this property." Stephen's reply came soft and deliberate. "You should be careful with your words, officer. You don't know who you're talking to." The look that crossed Grant's face was part irritation, part uncertainty. Behind him, Davis muttered, "Guy's bluffing." But the crowd could feel it, the unspoken gravity in Stephen's voice, the sense that something larger was unfolding. No one spoke. No one moved. The morning wind died down again, leaving only the echo of tension between three men in the pale autumn light. And though no one knew it yet, this quiet confrontation would mark the beginning of Red Creek's reckoning. The cold morning air of Red Creek grew heavier as the uneasy silence stretched across the gas station. Officer Grant stood in front of Stephen, his face twisted in irritation, while Officer Davis leaned casually against the patrol car, watching with a smirk that barely hid his anticipation. The coffee stain on the ground had already begun to dry, leaving behind a dark outline, like the echo of a mistake that refused to fade. A small group of locals lingered nearby, pretending to mind their business but too curious to leave. The tension was subtle at first, but it was growing, fed by every glare and every breath. Stephen stood quietly, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable behind the dark glasses. Grant, on the other hand, couldn't stand the calm. Something about the stranger's composure made him feel smaller, and that feeling drove him to push harder. "I said move along," Grant barked again, his voice sharper this time. The sound carried across the lot, startling a crow that had been perched on the streetlight above. It flew off, its wings beating loudly in the stillness. Stephen didn't flinch. He slowly lifted his gaze to meet the officer's eyes. "You've already made yourself clear," he said evenly. "But I'm not doing anything wrong. There's no law against standing here." Grant's jaw clenched. "You think you can argue with me? You're on police property. That's reason enough." Davis chuckled under his breath. "He's one of those types, Grant. Talks calm so he can feel smarter than everyone else." Stephen turned his head slightly toward Davis. "Calm isn't arrogance, it's control." His tone was measured, unshaken. "You should try it sometime." The remark, though spoken softly, hit its mark. Davis straightened, his smirk fading. Grant stepped forward again, now just inches from Stephen's face. "You got a real mouth on you, don't you?" Stephen's voice didn't rise. "Just telling the truth." The crowd was growing. 2 men who had been inside the store came out, phones already in hand, pretending to check messages, but clearly recording. The woman with the child had moved her car closer to the exit, ready to leave if things got out of hand. Even the gas station clerk had come to the door, peering nervously through the glass. The sense that something important was about to happen hung over the place, like the scent of rain before a storm. Grant's pride couldn't take the weight of all those eyes watching him. "You think you're untouchable, huh?" he said, poking Stephen in the chest with one finger. "You think standing there makes you some kind of hero?" Stephen stayed perfectly still. "No," he said. "It just means I'm not afraid." That answer, quiet and steady, struck deeper than any insult could have. Grant's anger boiled over. "Put your hands where I can see them," he snapped. Stephen slowly raised his hands to chest level, palms open. His movements were deliberate, free of panic. "There's no need for this," he said again. Davis laughed, though his tone now carried uncertainty. "You hear him, Grant? Thinks he's above the rules. Maybe we should take him in and let the chief sort him out." Grant nodded slightly, the idea taking hold. "That's not a bad idea." He reached for his cuffs, the metal clinking faintly. "You're coming with us for resisting an officer." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Several bystanders gasped quietly. A man by the pumps muttered, "Resisting? He hasn't even moved." The woman near the store shook her head. "This is wrong," she said under her breath, clutching her phone tighter. Stephen didn't step back, didn't argue. His voice came low but firm. "You're about to cross a line you can't uncross." Grant hesitated just long enough to betray a flicker of doubt. "Oh yeah? And what line is that?" "The one between authority and abuse," Stephen replied. His words were calm, but the force behind them made Davis shift uneasily. Grant sneered to hide his uncertainty. "You talk like you're somebody," Davis said, his tone defensive. Stephen turned his head slightly, his sunglasses catching the reflection of the morning sun. "Maybe I am," he said. Grant scoffed. "You're nobody. Just another loudmouth who thinks he knows the law better than we do." He grabbed Stephen's arm roughly, pulling it toward the patrol car. Stephen allowed himself to be moved, not resisting, but clearly in control of his balance. His stance remained centered, steady, as if nothing the officer did could shake him. When Grant tried to push him down against the hood, Stephen simply pivoted slightly, a small adjustment that threw Grant off balance without violence. The officer stumbled forward half a step, catching himself with a frustrated grunt. The movement was so subtle, so fluid, that it looked less like resistance and more like inevitability. The crowd murmured in surprise. "What was that?" Davis demanded, stepping closer. "Just gravity," Stephen said quietly. "You should learn how to work with it, not against it." Grant's face turned red. "You think this is a game?" He shoved Stephen harder this time, but the man didn't budge. His boots stayed planted, his body unmoved. The contrast between the officer's aggression and the stranger's stillness made the scene feel almost unreal. Then someone in the crowd spoke up. "He's not doing anything wrong." The voice, a man's, cut through the tension. "You're harassing him." Grant spun around, furious. "Mind your own business," he shouted. That moment broke the thin line between fear and courage in the bystanders. Another voice joined in. "We're minding our business. You're the one making trouble." Phones were raised higher now. The clicking of cameras and the faint hum of recording apps filled the air. The officers were no longer in control of the moment. Stephen, still calm, spoke again. "You don't want to do this, officer." Grant glared at him. "Oh, I think I do." He reached for his baton, the leather strap sliding free with a sharp sound that made several people flinch. Stephen didn't move. His tone dropped lower, steady as the heartbeat of the mountain itself. "Then you're about to make your second mistake." Grant froze mid-motion, unsure why those words carried so much weight. Davis's eyes darted nervously between his partner and the stranger. The air was so still that even the distant rustle of leaves had stopped. The entire gas station seemed to hold its breath. Everyone was watching the officers, the bystanders, the quiet man in the leather jacket who refused to lose his composure. The sunlight had climbed higher now, stretching long shadows across the asphalt, and in that sharp, suspended moment, no one could tell how it would end. What they didn't yet realize was that this was no ordinary encounter, and the calm man standing before them was not just another traveler passing through Red Creek. Something larger was unfolding, something that would change the town forever. The rising sun had climbed above the hills, casting sharp beams of light across the gas station lot. The tension that had been building between the three men was so thick that even the wind seemed to hesitate. Officer Grant stood frozen, his baton half drawn, his jaw tight. Officer Davis glanced at him uncertainly, sensing that they were no longer in control of what was happening. Stephen stood still, his presence calm but commanding, his eyes hidden behind the dark lenses that reflected both the officers and the gathering crowd. Dozens of eyes were now fixed on the scene, some wide with fear, others with curiosity. A man from a delivery truck parked nearby was recording everything on his phone, his hand shaking slightly from the weight of what he was witnessing. A woman murmured to someone beside her, "He's not even fighting back. Why are they doing this?" Grant's knuckles whitened around the handle of the baton. He didn't know why, but the stranger's composure unnerved him more than shouting ever could. He wanted to feel like the one in control, but standing before this calm figure, he felt like a child pretending to wear a uniform. Davis shifted again, his earlier smirk long gone. "Grant," he muttered quietly. "Maybe we should just—" But he didn't finish. A car had pulled into the lot, slowing as it approached the scene. The vehicle was sleek, silver, and unfamiliar to most of the locals. Its driver's expression tightened as soon as he saw the crowd and the two officers facing off with the tall stranger. The car stopped, and out stepped Deputy Mayor Collins. His suit jacket flared slightly in the breeze as he shut the door and surveyed the situation with narrowed eyes. He was a man used to reading chaos and understanding its consequences before anyone else. What he saw in that moment told him everything. He recognized the stranger instantly, though the sunglasses and jacket might have fooled someone less observant. Collins felt his stomach sink. This was not the way Red Creek's new beginning was supposed to unfold. The crowd shifted as Collins walked closer. Someone whispered, "Isn't that the deputy mayor?" Another person replied, "What's he doing here?" The murmurs rippled outward, blending with the distant hum of traffic. Grant turned toward the interruption, irritated that his control over the scene was slipping away. "Sir, step back," he ordered sharply. "This is official police business." Collins kept walking, his tone calm but edged with authority. "I can see that," he said. "But from where I'm standing, it looks like you're about to make a very serious mistake." Grant frowned, not yet understanding. "And who exactly are you to tell me how to do my job?" Collins stopped just a few feet away, glancing at Stephen, who stood motionless. "Someone who knows more than you think," he replied. Stephen gave no sign of acknowledgement, though his posture straightened slightly. His calm silence only made the moment heavier. Davis looked between the two men, his confusion growing. "What's going on here?" he muttered under his breath. Collins exhaled slowly, then raised his voice so the crowd could hear. "You two don't even know who you're talking to, do you?" Grant laughed once, short and sharp, trying to hide his unease. "Some guy who thinks he's better than us, that's who." Collins's expression hardened. "That's your new chief of police." The words struck like thunder. The murmurs turned into gasps, the sound spreading through the onlookers like a wave. Phones were raised higher, capturing every face, every flicker of disbelief. Davis froze completely, his eyes widening as if the air had been knocked out of him. Grant blinked once, twice, his mind refusing to process what he'd just heard. "What did you say?" he demanded, his voice suddenly weaker. "You heard me," Collins replied evenly. "You're standing in front of Chief Stephen Seagal, appointed by the town council 2 days ago. I was on my way to meet him at the station." Grant's baton hung uselessly at his side. For a moment, he looked lost. "That's impossible," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, doubt crept in. Stephen finally moved. Slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and drew out a black leather badge holder. He flicked it open with practiced ease, revealing the silver emblem of the Red Creek Police Department, its engraving gleaming under the sunlight. The crowd collectively inhaled. Davis took a step back, his throat dry. Grant stared at the badge, as if it might vanish if he blinked. Stephen's voice, when it came, was low but powerful enough to command the space. "Officer Grant, Officer Davis." He said their names without anger, without emphasis, but each syllable landed like a weight. "You wear that badge to protect the people of this town, not to intimidate them." Grant swallowed hard, shame flushing his face. "Chief, we didn't know." Stephen raised a hand slightly, silencing him. "That's not the point." His tone remained level, calm, but the gravity behind it made even the spectators fall silent. "The problem isn't that you didn't recognize me. The problem is that you treated any man this way." The crowd was utterly quiet now. The delivery driver lowered his phone slowly, the recording still running as he whispered, "He's right." Stephen took a single step forward, his presence almost physical. "Respect isn't something you hand out to those you like. It's the foundation of your duty. Without it, the badge means nothing." Collins watched, saying nothing. He didn't need to. The chief was taking control of the moment exactly as he had hoped someone would. Grant's shoulders sagged, his earlier confidence dissolved. "Chief," he began, voice rough. "You thought wrong," Stephen said, cutting him off not harshly but decisively. "You saw someone you didn't recognize and decided he didn't deserve dignity. That ends today." The words carried across the lot, reaching every person in the crowd. A murmur of agreement rose among them, small at first, then louder. Someone started clapping softly. Others joined in. It wasn't wild applause. It was slow, respectful, like the town itself was acknowledging something it had been missing. Davis lowered his gaze, the weight of humiliation settling over him. Grant nodded stiffly, unable to meet Stephen's eyes. The sound of the clapping grew stronger for a moment, then faded into an expectant hush. Stephen looked at both men, his expression unreadable. "You have a chance to learn from this," he said quietly. "Being an officer isn't about power. It's about restraint. It's about being the calmest person in the room when everyone else loses theirs." He turned toward the crowd. "And every one of you here," he continued, his voice carrying, "has the right to expect that from your police. You should never fear the people sworn to protect you." The tension in the air lifted like fog, burning off under sunlight. Collins nodded approvingly. Around them, the townspeople stood taller, as if reminded of something they had forgotten. That authority could coexist with decency. Stephen glanced once more at Grant and Davis. "You'll report to my office after your shift," he said. "We'll discuss what comes next." Both men nodded, subdued, their earlier arrogance gone. The baton hung forgotten in Grant's hand. Stephen's gaze swept the crowd one last time before he added, "Go about your day, folks. There's no need for more spectacle. What matters is that we move forward, and we do it right." He walked past the officers, past the murmuring onlookers, toward Deputy Mayor Collins, who stood waiting near his car. The official gave him a faint, approving smile. "Quite the introduction, Chief," he said quietly. Stephen returned the smallest hint of a smile. "Not the one I planned," he said, his voice calm again. "But maybe the one they needed." As the two men left the lot, the sunlight gleamed off the badge still in Stephen's hand, and the people of Red Creek watched them go in silence, knowing that something had just changed in their town, perhaps for the first time in a long while. The sound of engines faded as the deputy mayor's car pulled away, leaving only the murmurs of the remaining townspeople and the faint rustle of leaves in the cool autumn air. The confrontation that had started as a meaningless show of power had ended in a moment of clarity, and everyone who had witnessed it could feel the shift. Officer Grant and Officer Davis stood by the patrol car, their uniforms still crisp, but their confidence stripped bare. The calm authority in Stephen's voice still echoed in their heads, every word a reminder of what they had forgotten about their duty. The crowd lingered, unsure whether to leave or to stay, as though they sensed that the new chief of police had not finished what he came to do. Stephen stood near the edge of the lot, his hands resting calmly at his sides, the faintest breeze moving the hem of his leather jacket. He wasn't angry. Anger would have been easy. What he felt instead was a quiet sense of responsibility, the heavy understanding that reforming a broken system always began with small, public reckonings like this one. He turned back to face the two officers. Their eyes dropped immediately, their earlier defiance nowhere to be found. "Gentlemen," he said evenly, "you made mistakes today, but mistakes can be lessons if you learn from them." His tone carried no venom, only gravity. Grant swallowed hard, looking like he wanted to speak, but couldn't find the right words. Davis shifted on his feet, rubbing the back of his neck. The weight of the watching crowd pressed on them both. Finally, Stephen spoke again. "You owe these people an apology," he said. The order was simple but not optional. Grant blinked, startled. "Now?" he asked quietly. "Now," Stephen confirmed. Grant turned toward the onlookers. His voice cracked when he began. "I'm sorry," he said, barely audible at first, "for how I acted. That wasn't right." Davis stepped forward, nodding awkwardly. "Me too," he added. "We let our tempers get the best of us." There was an uncomfortable silence for a few seconds, and then a woman in the crowd spoke up. "It takes guts to admit you're wrong," she said softly. Others murmured in agreement. Stephen let the moment settle before continuing. "You'll both report to the station after your shift," he said. "You're not suspended, but you will be retrained." Grant looked up, surprised. "Retrained?" Stephen nodded. 2 weeks of community service alongside the very people you swore to protect. And you'll attend mandatory de-escalation training. You need to understand what this badge really means. He tapped the emblem on his chest. It's not a shield for ego. It's a promise of discipline. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, this time approving. A man near the pumps clapped once, slowly, and others joined in, hesitant, but sincere. The tension that had once filled the air now gave way to something different, respect. Even those who had doubted the new chief's arrival could see that Red Creek was changing before their eyes. Stephen turned back to the people. "Justice isn't just about punishment," he said. "It's about correction, about giving people a chance to do better." His voice carried far beyond the gas station, and for a long moment, no one dared interrupt. Then, somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "That's what leadership looks like." Deputy Mayor Collins, standing a few steps away, nodded quietly. "Well handled, Chief," he said under his breath. "You've just earned the town's trust." Stephen didn't respond. He simply glanced at the officers one last time. "From this moment on," he said, "every action you take in that uniform represents more than you. It represents this entire town. Don't forget it." Grant and Davis nodded in unison, both humbled. Their earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by the uneasy realization of how close they had come to destroying their own careers. Stephen looked at them, then at the townspeople still holding their phones, still watching. "You can all go now," he said calmly. "There's nothing more to see. The point's been made." But as the people began to disperse, some stayed behind, wanting to thank him. An older man with a gray beard approached cautiously. "Chief," he said, his voice gravelly from years of working outdoors. "That was something else. Haven't seen a cop handle things like that in a long time." Stephen gave a small nod. "Thank you," he said. "But this is how it should always be." By late afternoon, the story was already spreading. The videos posted online were gaining traction, their titles filled with words like respect, justice, and new leadership. On social media, people from nearby towns were sharing clips of Stephen calmly diffusing the confrontation and delivering his quiet reprimand. Local news outlets began calling the station, requesting interviews. Collins called him that evening. "You're all over the internet," he said with a chuckle. "The whole state's talking about Red Creek." Stephen sighed lightly. "Let them talk," he replied, "as long as they remember the message, not the man." The next day, the streets of Red Creek felt different. People greeted the police cars with nods instead of suspicion. In the diner near the square, conversations buzzed about the new chief. "Did you see how he handled those two?" someone said. "Didn't even raise his voice." Others nodded. "Finally, someone who knows what leadership looks like." At the station, the atmosphere was subdued. Officers who had once rolled their eyes at the mention of reforms now spoke quietly, uncertain of what the new chief expected, but aware that things had changed. Stephen arrived early, his presence calm but commanding. He didn't have to demand respect. He carried it naturally. When he passed through the hall, conversations paused, not out of fear, but out of awareness. Later that day, he met with Collins again. They stood outside the station, looking out at the town that was slowly waking up to a new era. "You handled that better than anyone could have," Collins said. "I think the council made the right choice bringing you in." Stephen's response was quiet but certain. "We can't fix a culture overnight," he said. "But we can start by holding people accountable. Respect is built, not ordered." As the sun began to set over Red Creek, painting the rooftops gold and amber, Stephen walked back to his car. The day had been long, but the quiet satisfaction in his chest told him that the hard part, The first step was done. He looked back once more at the town, where people were still talking, still sharing what they had seen. Maybe they would remember the lesson. Maybe they would expect more, not just from their police, but from each other. That thought stayed with him as he started the engine. The town was changing, and so was its spirit. For the first time in years, Red Creek didn't just look peaceful, it felt it. And for Steven Seagal, that was the kind of justice that mattered most. The morning after the confrontation at the gas station, Red Creek no longer felt like the same town. The air was clearer, lighter, as if the tension that had clung to it for years had finally loosened. People on their way to work exchanged nods with the officers patrolling the streets, something rare before. News vans had parked near the police station, their antennas reaching toward the sky, while local journalists prepared for interviews. Overnight, the videos from the gas station had spread like wildfire across social media. Every major outlet replayed the moment the calm stranger revealed his badge, the moment Chief Steven Seagal reminded two officers, and the world that respect was the heart of justice. Inside the station, the atmosphere was quieter than usual. The jokes and idle chatter that used to echo through the halls were gone. The officers spoke softly, their gazes occasionally flicking toward the closed door of the new chief's office. Behind it, Steven sat at his desk, reviewing reports and sipping black coffee, his expression unreadable. He didn't bask in the fame or the praise flooding in from the outside world. None of that mattered. What mattered was what would happen next. His phone buzzed with messages from other departments and state officials, all commending his handling of the situation. He responded to none of them. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said. Grant and Davis entered, both in uniform, both looking a little smaller than they had days before. They stood stiffly, hats in hand, uncertain whether to speak. "Chief," Grant began, his voice low and steady, "we're here to take responsibility. We know what we did was wrong. We embarrassed the department and the badge." Steven leaned back in his chair, studying them in silence for a moment. "You embarrassed the badge," he said finally, "but you also stood in front of the town and admitted your mistake. That matters." Davis nodded quickly. "We're ready to make it right." Steven rose from his chair and walked around the desk until he stood in front of them. "You'll be given that chance," he said. 2 weeks of community service. You'll work alongside the residents' clean parks, help at the food bank, repair what's broken. You'll look the people of this town in the eye and see them not as suspects, but as neighbors. After that, mandatory de-escalation training. The two men exchanged glances and nodded. "Understood, Chief," Grant said quietly. "Thank you for not ending our careers." Steven shook his head. "Don't thank me. Earn the second chance you've been given." Later that morning, the deputy mayor held a press conference outside the station. Reporters gathered around, their microphones pointed toward the podium, where Collins stood flanked by Steven and several senior officers. "Yesterday's events," Collins began, "though unfortunate, mark the beginning of a new chapter for Red Creek. We are committed to rebuilding trust between our police and our citizens." The crowd of journalists leaned forward as Steven stepped up to the microphone. Cameras flashed, the buzz of voices fading into silence. "Uniforms don't make us better than anyone else," he said. "They make us responsible for everyone else. The people of this town deserve fairness, humility, and respect from every officer at every moment. That is my promise." The simple statement resonated far beyond Red Creek. Within hours, national networks ran the clip with headlines about leadership, reform, and calm authority. Online, people called Steven's actions a masterclass in restraint. But in Red Creek, the effect was far more personal. Residents stopped him on the street to shake his hand. Local children pointed excitedly when they saw his patrol car. Even some of the older officers who had resisted change began to soften, realizing that the chief's quiet conviction wasn't weakness, it was strength. That evening, as the last of the reporters packed up and the lights faded from the station's front steps, Stephen sat alone in his new office. The hum of the town outside was peaceful, steady. On the wall hung a framed photograph of the entire department, taken years earlier. He studied it for a long time, his gaze moving from one face to another. Many of them were still on the force, hardened by habit, but not beyond hope. The work ahead would be long and difficult, but he had seen something shift in their eyes, a flicker of awareness, of possibility. There was another soft knock at the door. Davis stepped in, carrying a stack of paperwork. "Chief," he said awkwardly, "I just wanted to say thank you. Not for keeping me on the job, but for showing us what it actually means." Stephen looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Words are easy, Davis," he said quietly. "Prove it in how you serve. Every day." Davis nodded firmly and left. The chief leaned back in his chair, glancing toward the window. The sun was dipping below the ridge, turning the town gold. He could see the diner from his office window, the same one he'd passed that first morning. The old man was still there, sweeping the front steps, but this time he looked up and raised a hand in greeting. Stephen returned the gesture with a faint nod. The streets of Red Creek were calm again, but it was a different kind of calm, not born from fear or silence, but from respect earned through example. As the last light of day faded, Stephen took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment. The road ahead would test him, just as it would test every officer under his command. But for the first time in a long while, the town felt alive with something that had been missing: trust. He opened his eyes, a faint smile crossing his face. "It's a start," he murmured. Outside, the night settled over Red Creek, quiet and steady. The mountain wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the promise of change. And in the heart of the small town, the man who had turned a moment of conflict into a lesson of dignity sat alone, ready for whatever came next. The badge on his desk gleamed softly under the lamplight, a symbol not of power, but of responsibility, a reminder that true authority begins not with fear, but with respect. What would you have done in Red Creek that day? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. If you liked the story, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next chapter.